Okay, we're going to turn next to education, and our first question will come from Aaron Iron.
Good.
Hi, Senator.
Hey.
We heard from several people in our audience who had questions about education.
Yeah.
Judith specifically wanted to know about your plans for schools. So, do you believe that schools in Michigan have the resources they need to succeed to serve all students, including those with special needs? And do you think that schools are funded equitably?
Let me address the funding aspect. Yes, I do. But I tell you what, for the folks that think we're not funded adequately, I've actually got a way to go off and approach that problem in a way that gets to my core philosophy on education, is that education should not be managed centrally from the federal government or by the state government. It should be focused on the parents, the teachers, and the students. And what I mean by that is getting rid of this onerous testing that's happening, statewide testing. When I grew up, we didn't have something called the MEEP. We didn't have a statewide assessment. We would take the Iowa test and we take the California test to get some sort of a national benchmark as to where we were headed, but we didn't need a statewide assessment. And that's part of where this micromanagement comes from. Education, as somebody who served on the Senate Education Policy Committee and also served on the school board for Canton Charter Academy as treasurer, I understand how education works in the state. And essentially, you have a 5-layer cake in education. You got the standards bone connected to the assessment bone, connected to the curriculum bone, and then lesson plans and course materials. The bottom 3 have historically always been in the domain of the local school districts, yet we've been trying to take over more and more with the state level and the federal level up at the standards and assessment level, which drives what the curriculum is. I want to knock that off and actually get back to that local control of the teachers and the parents in the classroom. That's one of the reasons I'm also a big advocate for school choice. And so if you have all the local options, well, you got to give those students and those parents some options so that if they're not getting their needs met, maybe they've got a special needs student that they want to take somewhere where they're going to get a IEP that actually is followed through on. Maybe they should have the ability to go off and be portable with those funds to go off and get their student the proper education. That's why I implemented what I call the Enhanced Michigan Education Savings Program plan. It's like an education savings account. And what it does is expands the current provisions of the Michigan Education Savings Program into K through 12 services, as well as postgraduate services. So if I want to go into skilled trades, if I want to go off and have a professional development change or a professional development courses or a career change later on, it incentivizes education as a lifelong endeavor. And the beautiful thing about these student-specific accounts is that it opens the doors for third-party funding of student-specific accounts and student-specific educational needs. So, for example, in Detroit, we've got Cornerstone and Cristo Rey schools that are private schools. They don't benefit from this program at all, but they were used as a model for how this could work for public schools. They'll have work-study programs in high school where third-party companies will come up and partner with a student and say, in exchange for you working 5 days a month in my business, getting valuable experience, I'll put in $7,000 a year towards your education. Now that, if you were to apply that into the public school realm and open the doors for these partnerships to provide student-specific accounts that they could put this funding towards, that opens the door to almost a 50% increase in foundation allowance. The big rub of this, and why I've gotten some opposition from the AFT of Michigan, was that the parents are the ones in control where that funding goes. It's not the education bureaucracy. So there are paths to get more funding if you want them, but the key is to put the control back into the hands of the customers of education, which are the parents and students. And but bottom line is, I want to go to pure local control, and it doesn't get more local than the parents being in charge of where that money goes. We definitely need to get the state and the feds out of it. And I'm a big proponent of eliminating Common Core standards and taking some hits for proposing that. But the more you learn about it, the more that drives everything that's going down at the local level in that 5-layer cake. And it's something that we actually lose some of that local control with that standard philosophy.
So following up on the standardized testing question, or this issue, research shows that test scores are often determined or driven by socioeconomic and other factors. So, how well do you think the state's current accountability system, how fairly is it measuring schools? And Do you think that our current accountability system is a good way to determine whether a school should be closed?
Well, just to be clear, ultimately the accountability I'm most concerned about is accountability to the parents. Now, to the extent that you can provide parents with better information as to what's going on with an individual school or individual school district, I've supported, in theory, the concept of having different letter grades, not one rank file letter grade system, but having a letter grade on school growth, another one on achievement, another one on socioeconomic conditions, so that everybody can understand what they're getting into in a particular a school. So it's, in other words, you're informing the consumer. And so from that perspective, I'd support something of improved accountability on it. But the problem when you get into that mess is that now all of a sudden you are pushing for, it's not just what the end game is, it's what are all the intermediate steps necessary to get to that point. And when you go down that point, like teacher tenure reform, for example, we definitely needed to stop practices like last in, first out, where we were eliminating some of our best teachers in the classroom. But the solution that they came up with required that you had to start grading the teachers and assessing the teachers. Well, in order to do that, you need to go off and do an assessment. Well, it's that assessment that led to this statewide standard approach and the micromanagement of the classroom by the state and by the federal government. So while the accountability framework that you're kind of alluding to sounds good, and I'd like to have all that information out for parents, keep in mind what happens in order to implement that system. It forces that statewide assessment, because now I'm getting to the point where, all right, I'm going to do achievement, so I got to, unless you're just going to grade the socioeconomic conditions, if that's the only thing you're going to do, forget what I'm going to say here next. But if you're going to go off and start grading the achievement and the growth of that particular school, now all of a sudden you're pointing to a statewide assessment. And just be careful what you wish for is what it comes down to. I'm a big proponent that ultimately it's the customers who determine what the quality is. You want to find out whether or not a school is good or not, you go in and talk to the teachers. You talk to the teachers in classes that are not in that are not the teachers that your students are going to be in, because they're the ones who know what goes on in their classroom. Better yet, talk to the teachers in the grade level above the teacher that you're in right now, because they'll tell you whether or not the students were prepared for for their classroom. So there's a lot of different ways to go off and approach accountability. As an engineer, I started looking at the idea of a statewide assessment. I'm going, yeah, I could get behind we have ASHRAE standards or something that are standardized, but ultimately what it comes down to is I want the individual parent saying, yeah, that was a good job or not a good job.
Thanks.
Do you think Michigan should make changes to laws regarding how charter schools are governed and how they're funded?
No, I think what we should do, and actually I've faced this early on in my state Senate career. I mean, a lot of people on the Democratic side are proposing to eliminate charter schools altogether, which is essentially saying, hey, we know better about the education of your kids than you do, so talk to the hand parent. We don't care what you really have to say. So I have a little problem with that. But when it comes down to these false narratives around charters not playing under the same rules as a lot of the public schools, when I first got into the Senate, I asked my staff to go off and provide a matrix of all the Michigan compiled laws in different categories, everything from transportation to funding levels to curriculum requirements, all the way across the board. And we put out this table and we posted it to everybody and said, here's what it says for public school academies, which is what charter schools are, and they are public schools. They're not private schools like some people bogusly assert. And I said, here's the requirements for homeschoolers. Here's the requirements for parochial. Here's the requirements for traditional public schools. None of the differences that people start to highlight are evident by what's actually in law. And so I just encourage people to do their homework on what the differences are. And they talk about funding levels and requirements, and they say, oh, you get to pick and choose at a charter school. It's a lottery system, which is a horrible way to go off and determine your kid's future, frankly.
What can the state do about the high cost of childcare and the lack of preschool options for young children?
That's a tough thing to go off and do. But number one, I mean, it gets down to a fundamental discussion over social issues like the sanctity of marriage and the appreciation for families. I mean, because a lot of the reason you need a lot of these assistance, we've broken down an appreciation for the traditional family unit. And so if you have a mom that's working, for example, dad can stay home and take care of the kids. If you've got a dad that's working, mom can stay home and take care of the kids. We had a family structure that used to take care of some of those needs. Now, having said that, there are people that are going through transition phases and they're struggling with that care, and I want to make sure that we take care of them. But we got to look at some of the long-term solutions and not just the kind of quick fixes and throw money at it and provide some of these institutions to take care of it. I really want to make sure we get at the underlying root cause of this.
And finally, Sandy.
We talked about K-12 earlier. You just answered the question about early child care. On the other end of the public education spectrum, costs in higher education, are they prohibitively high among colleges and universities, and what could you do as governor about that?
Well, they are prohibitively high, and if you actually look at them, I mean, one of the studies I saw says that they're increasing the rate, the expenses at universities are increasing at the rate 5 times the rate of inflation everywhere else. I'm sorry, but there's just nothing inside a university that drives up or that is unique to them that would substantiate a increase on that level. So what I would propose is that the state would actually have more oversight over the universities. Right now they have essentially constitutional immunity for anything regards to fiduciary matters inside the universities. I would open that up, and I've got a resolution on the Senate floor right now that's designed to do just that. It's amend the Constitution so that the state would have more statutory oversight over university operations.